Tov, today's daf yomi is Bava Basra Kufayim Bava Basra 170. We're going to start on the bottom of Kuf Samach Tes Amud Beis 169b, 4 lines from the bottom. The daf yomi is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Matzal for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. In the Seis Torah, the Gemara said in yesterday's daf that Rabbah suggested that an earlier Tanaitic dispute between Rabbanan and Rav Shimon Gamliel was over a question of osios nichnis b'mesira. The Gemara talked about a case where a guy claims he lost his deed to the property. So the Tanna Kama says, write him another deed, just write it without a guarantee. Whereas Rav Shimon Gamliel says, no, you can't write him another deed. And Rabbi explains because osios nichnis b'mesira, that Rashbag is of the position that perhaps he had just given the deed away, and that way he had transferred the property. He didn't need another kinyan. And so therefore, Rabbis of the position that Rashbag says, osios, a contract, can be, the property behind the contract can be given away just by handing over the contract to somebody else. In this context, the Gemara cites a brisa, which is ambiguous. So if somebody wants to prove that a property is his, and he can prove it either perhaps by a contract, presumably that somebody handed over the contract, or a chazaka. Now, chazaka can either mean a proprietary act on the property, or by a chazaka claiming that he has had it for 3 years. At this point, we assume, Rashbam saying the assumption is at this point, is that he could say he did a proprietary act, nidon b'shtar. So Rabbi's position is that he should use the fact that he could even use the contract that it was handed over to him, or maybe only the contract, we'll see. Whereas Rashbag says b'chazaka, Rashbag says he could even use a chazaka, or maybe only a chazaka. There's going to be different opinions in the Gemara how to explain it. So what's the nature of this dispute? Kiyasa Rav Dimi. So Rav Dimi says, how do we explain this price? We're arguing about whether or not contracts can be handed over with what's called mesira. But just by handing over the deed, you've given over the property. That Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says that you have to use the chazaka, you can't use the osios niknos b'mesira, or on top of kufay and amar aleph, because these are the position ein osios niknos b'mesira. Says you can't give it over that way. Obviously, this contradicts what we just said. Rabba's explanation is Rav Dimi is contradicting Rabba's interpretation of Rav Shimon Gamliel. So Rav Dimi says, Rav Shimon Gamliel says you can acquire the property just by having the contract handed over. But Rabbi Savar, therefore you need to do a proprietary act in order to acquire it. Rabbi Savar. Whereas Rabbi's in the position, osios niknos b'mesira. Rabbi's in the position that the contract is acquired just by having it handed over. So Abayim came pukto demar. So Abayi says to Rav Dimi, well, you're arguing with Rabbi because Rabbi explains Rav Shimon Gamliel is saying osios niknos b'mesira, and you say he doesn't. So the Gemara says, Rav Dimi says, I'm really tiflog. Okay, yeah, no problem with me. I can easily argue with Rabbi. Obviously, Rabbi is a tremendous Talmud Chacham, but he's an Amora, and I'm an Amora. Amarleinu, Abai says, no, this is what I'm saying to you. Masniso mitaratz el katamaratz demar. Imkain kasher Rav Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, no, you have a problem because Rabbi had a very good explanation of the previous price. So why does Rav Shimon Gamliel say that you can't write him a new deed? It only makes sense if you say that he says that osios are niknos b'mesira. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, we have a contradiction because here Rav Shimon Gamliel is saying apparently osios are not niknos b'mesira, and that's why you have to use a chazaka. So therefore, how would Abaye explain this dispute over here between Rabbi and Rav Shimon Gamliel? Why does Rabbi Shimon Gamliel say you need to do a chazaka here? So Abaye says, why does Abaye say the contract here is no good, the deed is no good? Could go and puzzle because the deed itself had a problem with it. One of the witnesses was disqualified. Their relatives are disqualified. Who pulled to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Lazar, Kamiflaki. And it's the same dispute as Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Lazar, elsewhere in Shas. Rabbi Savar like Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi holds like Rabbi Lazar, who says in Maseches Gittin, Ede Mesire Karti, that it doesn't matter if you have the witnesses on the document are irrelevant. We need witnesses to having it being handed over. And so therefore, Rebbe's of the position that since you have, even though the witness is disqualified, if you see witnesses to the document being handed over, that's going to be enough to support the property, for you to support the property. He says, no, if the witnesses are on the deed are no good, those are the essential witnesses, and so therefore the document is not approved. So the Gemara says, but that can't be the argument because the Hamar Rabbi Abba, Modai Rabbi Lazar, even though Rabbi Lazar says that the witnesses for the handing over, the essential witnesses, nevertheless, that's not sufficient in a case where it's Mizuyov Misocho, where there was a forgery on the document. There, even Rabbi Lazar would say, even though you don't need those witnesses, the witnesses disqualify the document. And so therefore, in this case, if it was Karav Apostle, if one of the witnesses was a relative who disqualified, it doesn't matter if you hold like Rabbi Lazar Eda Mesira Karasi. So the Gemara says, Ela Marav Avina, Kol Modim, everybody's at the position, Shem Kosovo, who's Kaknu a Dusan, Shel Edim and Nimtas a Dusan Muzuyefeshu Apostle. He says, no, everybody will be at the position that if you said we entered into their testimony, and found it to be forgery, everybody will be at a position that it's disqualified, like Rabbi Abba. What we're talking about here is this: there's no witnesses on it at all. Rabbi Sarvak, Rabbi Lazar, Damar Ede, Mesira Kark. There's no witness on it at all. So Rabbi says, like Rabbi Lazar, document is still good. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Sarvak, Rabbi Damar Ede Chasime Karsi. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no, you need a chazaka because we need signatures on the document, otherwise it's not valid. Or alternative answer, this is a dispute we had already back earlier in our Masechta on Daf Kuf Nun Daled. We had the beginning of Bamitzia. That basically breakdown of this dispute is that you need to certify a document in order for it to be valid. But let's say the person who the claim is being made against, he admits that the document was written. He just says, yeah, it was written, but I have a reason why I don't need to pay it now. Either maybe I paid it already, or some other reason. So that's a mode of Ashtar Shakosvo. So he admits that the document was written. Well, now does it still need to be certified? So that's what they're arguing about. Rebbe says, mode of Ashtar Shakosvo ain't Tzarchakam. This is relying the contract, even though this deed, even though it's not certified, because he admits that it was written. And so therefore we can rely on the contract. Shimon Gamliel Savar Tzarchakaimo. Shimon Gamliel says, no, you still need to certify. The Gemara says, wait, how can we say that that's a dispute here? Didn't we learn the opposite? Tanya, we learned Shnaim Adukim Mishtar. If there are two people holding on to a document, Malva Omer Shalihu, Vinafal Mimeni Umitsato. So if there are two people holding on to a document, the lender says, listen, it was mine, and it fell out of my bag, and this guy found it, and I want it back. The borrower says, yeah, this document is real, but I paid it, meaning that he admits to it. Rebbe says you have to certify the document, otherwise it's not valid. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that they split it. And the way we explain this, doesn't Rabbi hold that if two people are holding a document, and they two people are holding a garment from the very first daf of Bava Basra, we say that they split it. Why in this case does he not split it? If the document will be certified and they're holding on to a certified document, everybody would agree that they split it. They're only arguing in the case where the document was not certified. Rabbi says, even though it wasn't certified, you still need to certify it. And if it would be certified, then you could collect half. Otherwise, it's just a piece of pottery, and so therefore he has to pay nothing. So, hold on one second. So therefore, he has to do Mekuyim, and once he does Mekuyim of the star, then he gets half. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Savar Mod B'Shar Shekaso Ein Sarcha Kaimu V'Yacholko. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says if he admits to the contract, he doesn't need to certify anymore, and they split it. So we see from here, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says Mod B'Shar Shekaso Ein Sarcha Kaimu. It's the opposite of what we said. Of how we tried to explain our dispute over here, and Rebbe, according to this approach, it says Mod B'Shar Shekaso Tzarcha Kaimu. So if that's the case, he shouldn't be able to rely on the deed over here. So Gemara indeed says Epoch, reverse the positions. And so you have to match up, reverse Rebbe and Rashbag so that they match each other. Or alternatively, perhaps you don't have to reverse the position. Here we're talking about a case of Lavara. What's Lavara? Lavara is that, technically speaking, the Lavara means where you have the person doesn't need to make arguments A and B. He doesn't need to say I have a deed. He just could say I have a chazaka, and that will be sufficient. Just have to say I've been here for 3 years. But now he said I have a deed also, when in addition to having a chazaka. So now the question is, does he need to produce the deed as well? So Rabbi's other position, you also have to produce the deed, because once you say an argument, even though you don't need it, you have to prove it. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no, you don't need to. You have the chazaka. And that's the case. And the Gemara gives an example of Lavar. Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef have a masik bezuzi by Rabbi Abba. Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef was making a claim for money from Rabbi Abba. So also coming to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So he came to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Amar paraticha b'fnei poni uponi. He said, listen, I already paid you back. He said, I see your document, but I paid you back in front of these people. He said, no, there's no document here. He said, I paid you back in front of these two witnesses. I'm like Rabbi Yitzchak. Then Rabbi Yitzchak says, to basically, who are the parties here? Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef was making a claim against Rabbi Abba. So then they came to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, and Rabbi Abba says, I paid you back in front of these two witnesses. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said, so bring the witnesses. Yavo poni v'yoidu. So Amar way. So Rabbi Abba said, you go also, well, ma'am, why do I need to bring the witnesses? Wouldn't I believe? Don't we have a principle that if you lend your friend with witnesses, but you don't need to pay him back with witnesses, because that's not the way it works by a loan that was not written down. You could just pay him back on your own. So I'm like, Anabahi Kashmaita Demaris for your way. He said, no, says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. I hold, like we just learned, Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abba, Rabba, Rabba, Chaver Particha B'fnei Poni. What did Rav say? He say, I pay you in front of Poni. Tzarch she'have Poni v'ayidu. You need to bring the witnesses. Rav Gida bar Rav Amar Rav Halacha K'divrei Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. That the law is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says you don't need to ein tzarach havar. You don't need to prove all the arguments if it's not necessary. If you said too much, he said, yeah, and even Rabbi Lo Amar Al Lavar. Rabbi just says the contract is only Lavar, only because you didn't need it. So in this case, it shouldn't be necessary. Mikra din, the law should be like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. He says, no, Amar way Ananami Lavar Kamina. I also said Lavara. He says, I paskin like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Once you say the argument, you put it out there, you have to prove it. So that's it. So you have to be careful what you say, because once you say something, you have to prove it. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. Misha para miktas chov. A person paid, let's say, Reuven or Shimon $100, and Reuven owes Shimon $100, and he pays him back 50. So under those circumstances, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yaakov. So Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, now Shimon had a note on Reuven for $100. Reuven has to give him a new note saying that he owes him 50. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yichtov Shova. Rabbi Yossi says no, he doesn't give him a new note, but basically he has to get a receipt. That Reuven gets a receipt that he paid $50, which means he has to hold the receipt. And if he loses that receipt, Shimon could take the initial document and demand $100 again. Amar Rav Yehuda Nimtza Zed Tzarach Yos Shomer Shovrom and Achbarim. Oh, so now we see that Reuven has to guard his receipt from the mice. Amar Rav Yossi Kach Yafelo. Yeah, this is to the advantage of the lender. We don't want to ruin the advantage of the lender, because we want to force him to pay because this way he'll be intimidated. He'll say, "Oh, I might lose my receipt, so therefore I better pay before I lose my receipt." So we see from here that the borrower, according to Rabbi Yossi, is in the weaker position. Therefore, he has to hold the receipt. So the Gemara says, "Amar Afuna Amarav Eino Locha Lok Rabbi Yehuda Lok Rabbi Yossi." So he says the law is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Again, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda says that the borrower basically just writes a new contract for the lender for the new amount, and Rabbi Yossi, who says no, that the borrower just has a receipt that he paid it. He says the law is not like either one. Ella bezdin mekar nashtar because of nashtar achar mizman rishon. Not that the witnesses write it, but it has to be done in a court. Meaning to say, not like Rabbi Yehuda says, who says even witnesses are able to write a new document with the earlier date, but rather you have to go to the court, and the court has to do it. If Rav had heard the following brisa, we're going to get into this brisa tomorrow. The Tanya Edim Mekaranus Ashtar, because of Ashtar Achar means man Rishon. If Rav Huna had heard the following, if he said if Rav had heard the following brisa, which says that witnesses tear up the document and they write a new document from the earlier date, so you could have the initial guarantee. Have a holiday break. He would have recanted. He would have said, "You don't need a court. You just need the witnesses to do it." The problem is that the earlier date, this document is being written, and you're predating the document in order to help the people to get the guarantee. Now, technically speaking, you had initial loan now, but now we're having a later document. It shouldn't be allowed to be done by witnesses. It's something serious, so you should need a court to do it. So the Gemara says, says, "Yeah, I heard it. I heard this price so that witnesses could do it, but I didn't agree with it." So the Gemara says, "Bishlam a beidina," and the Gemara says, "What's Rav's reasoning on top of That makes sense. Why a court? It makes sense why the court couldn't take away the money from another person because the court has the right to do hefker bezin hefker, and so therefore they can write a predated document." And they'll collect from the lien holders. They'll use the property to collect from other property. These witnesses, they already did their shlichus. They already wrote it one time, so now they're going to make up another document. Who gave them the authority to do this? They can't write an earlier date. And so therefore, Rav does not think that witnesses could write this new deed, this new promissory note, and put in an earlier date in it. Okay, we'll stop here. This is today's daf. Yashakoach.